The morning sun peeked through the blinds as she opened her eyes. Today was her 30th birthday, and for once she had allowed herself to feel excited about it. As a nurse who spent most of her days caring for others, she rarely took time to celebrate herself. But her coworkers had insisted on throwing her a small party during their lunch break, and after much persuasion, she had finally agreed. She got out of bed quietly, trying not to wake her boyfriend who was still asleep despite his alarm going off twice already. They had been together for 3 years, but lately things had been different. He seemed annoyed by her long hours at the hospital and often made comments about how her job took up too much of her time. Still, he had promised to stop by the hospital during his lunch break today to join her birthday celebration, and he had mentioned a special gift that made her curious. After a quick shower, she applied a little makeup, something she didn't do often for work. Today felt special, and she wanted to look nice in the photos her friends would inevitably take. Her boyfriend stirred as she was about to leave. "You're wearing makeup to work?" he asked, his voice carrying a hint of judgment. "Just a little," she replied with a smile. "It's my birthday, remember? You're still coming by at lunch, right?" He mumbled something that sounded like a yes and rolled over. She chose to believe it was confirmation and headed out the door with a hopeful heart. The hospital hallway seemed brighter that morning. A patient in room 302 wished her happy birthday when she came in to check his vitals. "My daughter mentioned it was your special day," he explained. "You've been so kind to me during my stay here." Those small moments were why she loved her job. Despite the long hours and physical exhaustion, making a difference in people's lives even in small ways filled her with purpose. By mid-morning, she noticed colorful decorations appearing in the break room. Her closest work friend had been sneaking in and out, trying to be discreet but failing miserably. The sight made her laugh. For years, she had downplayed her birthday, insisting it wasn't important, but deep down, the effort her colleagues were making touched her heart. "Don't peek," her friend called out when she tried to enter the break room around 11:30. "We're not ready yet." So she continued with her rounds, checking on patients and filling out charts. Her phone buzzed with birthday messages from family and old school friends, each one warming her heart. Her parents had called early that morning, singing off-key over the phone in a tradition that had continued since she left home for nursing school. At noon, her friend came to find her. "We're ready for you now," she announced with a grin that suggested she was particularly proud of her handiwork. The break room had been transformed. Blue and silver streamers hung from the ceiling, her favorite colors, though she couldn't remember ever mentioning that at work, and a banner with "Happy 30th Birthday" stretched across one wall. A small crowd of colleagues had gathered. Doctors she worked with, nurses from her unit, even some of the administrative staff who she always made a point to chat with during her shifts. "This is too much," she said, feeling her eyes grow misty. "You all didn't have to do this." "Of course we did," replied the head nurse. "You're always taking care of everyone else. Today, we take care of you." On a table sat a cake from her favorite bakery across town. Someone must have made a special trip to get it. The thought of her coworkers planning this, coordinating their busy schedules to create this moment for her, was overwhelming. As everyone sang and she prepared to blow out the candles, she found herself glancing at the door, hoping to see her boyfriend walking in with his promised gift, but the doorway remained empty. After cutting the cake and distributing it to her colleagues, she checked her phone. No messages. She sent a quick text. "The party started. Are you on your way?" She watched the screen, seeing the message marked as delivered, then read, but no reply came. "Everything okay?" her friend asked, noticing her distraction. "Yeah, he's just running late," she replied, tucking her phone away and forcing a smile. She wouldn't let his tardiness ruin this moment with people who had gone out of their way to celebrate her. The next 30 minutes passed in a blur of conversations, cake and small gifts from her colleagues, a scented candle from one, a gift card to her favorite coffee shop from another, and a beautiful journal from the group of night shift nurses who had stayed late just to see her. When her boyfriend finally arrived, he was over an hour late and empty-handed, His hair was uncombed and he wore the same clothes from yesterday. The smile she had been maintaining faltered slightly, but she quickly recovered, waving him over to join the celebration. "Sorry I'm late," he muttered, but didn't offer any explanation. She noticed him eyeing the cake, the decorations, and her colleagues with something like resentment, as if their efforts somehow criticized his lack of preparation. "I'm just glad you're here," she said sincerely, introducing him to a new doctor who had joined their unit recently. Her boyfriend gave curt responses to friendly questions, creating an uncomfortable atmosphere that hadn't existed before his arrival. As the party continued around them, she leaned close to him and whispered, "Is everything all right? You seem upset." "I'm fine," he snapped, loud enough for nearby colleagues to hear. Not everyone wants to make a big deal about getting older. The sting of his words made her cheeks burn with embarrassment. One of the older nurses shot him a disapproving look, which only seemed to irritate him further. Trying to salvage the situation, she changed the subject. "Did you have a busy morning? I was wondering if that's why you were running late." He shrugged, helping himself to cake without responding. The silence stretched between them, uncomfortable and heavy with unspoken tensions. Finally gathering her courage, she asked quietly, "Did you forget about the gift you mentioned? It's totally fine if you did, I just—" Her words hung in the air as she watched something shift in his expression. The break room, which had been filled with laughter and warmth just moments before, suddenly felt too quiet, as if everyone was holding their breath. She hadn't realized that her simple question would be the spark that would change everything. The break room had gone from cheerful to tense in just a few seconds. Her co-workers tried to carry on with their conversations, but everyone could feel the change in the air. Her boyfriend stood with his paper plate of cake, looking at her as if she had said something terrible instead of simply asking about a gift he had promised. "You think everything's about you, don't you?" he said, his voice louder than necessary for the small room. A few heads turned their way, but most people pretended not to notice, giving them the privacy that hospital staff often tried to provide each other during personal moments. "I didn't mean it like that," she whispered, feeling her cheeks grow warm. "I was just wondering—" "You were just wondering where your present is," he cut her off. "Because that's all you care about. Gifts and parties and making sure everyone knows it's your special day." Her friend stepped closer, sensing trouble. "Hey, we should probably start cleaning up. Break time's almost over." It was a gentle attempt to diffuse the situation, to give them both an exit from what was quickly becoming uncomfortable. But her boyfriend wasn't finished. 3 years of dating had taught her the signs. The tightness around his mouth, the way his fingers gripped the paper plate so hard it bent in the middle, the slight flush creeping up his neck. Something inside him had snapped, and for some reason, he had decided that here, now, in front of all her colleagues, was the time to let it out. "Do you know what I was doing this morning instead of shopping for your precious gift?" he asked, his voice carrying across the room. The pretense of private conversations around them had stopped. Everyone was watching now, frozen in place like a scene from a movie. "I was at a job interview because the position you told me was beneath me. Last month is actually still open. But you wouldn't know that because you're too busy being celebrated by your work friends." The unfairness of his accusations stung. She had never said any job was beneath him. She had only suggested that with his degree, he might find something more fulfilling than the part-time retail position he had been considering. She had been trying to be supportive, to believe in his potential. "That's not what I said," she replied, keeping her voice steady despite the trembling she felt inside. "And we can talk about this later at home. This isn't the place." "Of course, it isn't the place," he mocked. "It never is the place to talk about anything real, is it? Not when it might make you look bad in front of people who think you're so perfect." The head nurse stepped forward now, her experienced face showing concern. "I think we should give you two some privacy," she said, making a subtle gesture for others to leave the break room. But her boyfriend shook his head. "No need. I was just about to go anyway. I've got better things to do than watch everyone fawn over the birthday girl." He took a step toward the door, then paused, turning back with a look that made her stomach drop. She had seen that look before. usually before he said something intentionally hurtful. "You know what your problem is?" he continued, as if they were alone and not surrounded by people who respected her professionally. "You think you're so important because you wear that uniform and save lives or whatever, but at home, you're just as selfish and needy as everyone else." She felt as if she'd been slapped. The room seemed to spin slightly as she tried to process his words, the unfamiliar cruelty in them. This wasn't like their other arguments, the bickering about household chores or his comments about her long hours. This felt like he was trying to hurt her, deliberately and publicly. "That's enough," her friend said firmly, stepping between them. "You need to leave." Her boyfriend's face twisted into an ugly smile. "Oh, I'm leaving, but first—" He reached for his coffee cup sitting on the nearby table. It was one of those paper cups from the hospital cafeteria, still half full with lukewarm coffee he had barely touched. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. He lifted the cup and, with a deliberate motion that could never be mistaken for an accident, threw the contents directly into her face. The coffee splashed across her cheeks, dripped down her uniform, and soaked into the birthday card she had been holding. A collective gasp filled the room. For a moment, nobody moved. Not her, not her boyfriend, not any of the stunned onlookers. Coffee dripped from her chin onto the floor, making tiny splashing sounds that seemed unnaturally loud. In the silence, "Happy birthday," he said with a cold smile before turning and walking out, leaving her standing there dripping and humiliated. The shock held her frozen for several heartbeats. Then her body began to react, her eyes stinging from the coffee, her skin feeling sticky, the smell of cheap cafeteria brew overwhelming her senses. But worse than any physical discomfort was the knowledge that every person in that room, doctors she consulted with, nurses she mentored, staff she greeted each morning, had witnessed her complete humiliation. Her friend was the first to move, grabbing napkins from the table. "Oh my God, are you okay?" she asked, beginning to dab at the coffee stains spreading across the light blue scrubs. The head nurse was next, her voice calm but firm as she directed someone to get a clean set of scrubs from the supply room. A young intern rushed off, apparently grateful to have a task that took him away from the awkward scene. "I'm fine," she managed to say, though her voice sounded strange even to her own ears. "It wasn't hot, I'm not burned or anything." But they all knew the heat of the coffee wasn't the issue. The burning came from somewhere else. From the shame of having someone who was supposed to love her treat her with such contempt. From the knowledge that this moment would be whispered about in hospital corridors for weeks to come. Someone handed her more napkins. Another colleague began quietly cleaning up the spilled coffee from the floor. The kindness of these small gestures almost undid her, threatening to break the fragile composure she was desperately trying to maintain. "Let's get you cleaned up," her friend said gently, guiding her toward the door. "We can use the staff bathroom." As they walked down the hallway, she could feel eyes following them, curious glances from people who hadn't been in the break room but could clearly see something was wrong. The coffee had left large brown stains down the front of her scrubs, and despite her friend's efforts with the napkins, her face still felt sticky with residue. In the stark light of the bathroom, she finally saw her reflection, mascara running down her cheeks, mixing with the coffee to create muddy streaks. Her carefully styled hair for her birthday was now plastered to her forehead in places. The woman looking back at her from the mirror seemed like a stranger, vulnerable, wounded, diminished. "I can't believe he did that," her friend said, wetting paper towels to help clean her face. That was so far out of line, she couldn't speak. If she opened her mouth, she feared everything would come pouring out, not just about today, but about all the other moments that had led to this one. The subtle put-downs when she talked about her accomplishments at work. The way he rolled his eyes when she mentioned wanting to get a master's degree someday. How he had accidentally deleted several photos of her with male colleagues from her phone. Looking at her coffee-stained reflection, she suddenly saw their relationship with perfect clarity. This public humiliation wasn't a one-time loss of temper. It was simply the most visible manifestation of something that had been happening, in smaller ways for years, and everyone had seen it. The staff bathroom became a sanctuary of sorts. Her friend dampened more paper towels and gently wiped the coffee from her face, being careful around her eyes where tears had mixed with the brown liquid. Neither spoke for several minutes. What was there to say after something like that? The intern brought a clean set of scrubs, her friend finally said, holding up the folded blue uniform. They're probably a bit big, but better than walking around with coffee stains all day. She nodded, taking the scrubs with hands that wouldn't quite stop trembling. Thank you, she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. Do you want me to stay while you change, or? No, I think I need a minute alone. The words came out choked, as if her throat was fighting against them. Her friend hesitated, clearly concerned about leaving her. I'll be right outside the door if you need anything at all. When the door closed, she leaned against the sink, finally allowing the tears to flow freely. Her birthday, her 30th birthday, the day she had reluctantly allowed herself to be celebrated, to feel special, and now it was ruined. Not just ruined for her, but turned into a spectacle that would follow her through the hospital hallways in whispers and sympathetic glances. She pulled off her coffee-soaked scrub top, dropping it into the sink. As she did, her phone fell from the pocket, clattering against the porcelain. The screen lit up with notifications, birthday wishes from family and friends who had no idea what had just happened. And there, among them, a text from him. You deserve that. Call me when you're ready to apologize. The message hit her like a physical blow. She stared at it, reading and rereading the words until they blurred through her tears. Apologize? For what? For having a birthday? For allowing her colleagues to celebrate her? For asking about a gift he had promised? She thought back to earlier times in their relationship, searching for signs that should have warned her. There had been moments. The time he criticized her for laughing too loudly at a friend's joke, saying she was showing off. The way he checked her phone when she wasn't looking, questioning who had texted her, how he subtly undermined her accomplishments at work, suggesting her promotions came because her boss obviously had a thing for her. Each incident on its own had seemed small, explainable. She had made excuses for him. He was insecure because his own career wasn't taking off. He had trust issues from past relationships. He was just having a bad day. But now, looking at her tear-streaked reflection in the mirror, those excuses felt hollow. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. You okay in there? Her friend called gently. I'll be right out, she replied, quickly changing into the clean scrubs. They were indeed too big, but she rolled the sleeves and tied the drawstring waist as tight as it would go. After splashing cold water on her face and pulling her hair back into a simple ponytail, she looked almost normal again. Almost. When she opened the door, she found not just her friend waiting, but the head nurse as well. We've adjusted the schedule, the head nurse said without preamble. You can go home for the rest of the day, everyone will understand. The kindness nearly broke her composure again. I'm not sure going home is a good idea right now, she admitted, showing them the text message still displayed on her phone. Her friend read it and made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a growl. You're not apologizing to that. She cut herself off, glancing at the head nurse before choosing a more professional word. To that person. Ever. The head nurse's face showed a controlled anger as she read the message. Do you have somewhere else you can go? A friend's place, family. She thought about her options. Her parents lived 3 hours away. Most of her close friends from before the relationship had gradually drifted away, something she now realized hadn't been accidental. He had always had a reason why they shouldn't visit certain people, or why those friends weren't good for her. I could get a hotel room, she said finally, just for tonight while I figure things out. Her friend shook her head firmly. You're staying with me. My spare room isn't fancy, but it's yours for as long as you need it. I couldn't impose. It's not an imposition. It's what friends do. The head nurse nodded her approval. That sounds like the best plan for now, and I want you to know that what happened today. She paused, choosing her words carefully. It doesn't reflect on you professionally. Everyone who witnessed that scene knows exactly who was in the wrong. The reassurance meant more than she could express. Her job was everything to her, the result of years of hard work and dedication. The thought that this incident might somehow damage her professional reputation had been lurking beneath her other concerns. "Thank you," she said, meaning it deeply. "Take the rest of the day," the head nurse insisted, "and tomorrow too if you need it. Your patients will be covered." After gathering her belongings, she and her friend left through a side entrance, avoiding the main lobby where rumors of what had happened were likely already circulating. The drive to her friend's apartment was mostly silent, both women wrapped in their own thoughts. Once inside the modest but cozy apartment, her friend showed her to the spare room. "It's not much, but the bed is comfortable. It's perfect," she replied, setting her bag down on a chair. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to thank me, just take care of yourself, and don't respond to any more texts from him. Okay? At least not today." Left alone in the quiet room, she sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall. Her phone buzzed again, another text from him, this one longer but likely no more apologetic than the first. She didn't read it. Instead, she did something she'd never done before. She blocked his number. The action, simple as it was, felt monumental. 3 years of her life cut off with a single tap on her phone screen. She wasn't naive enough to think it would end there. He knew where she worked, where she lived. But it was a start. A statement to herself as much as to him. She looked around the unfamiliar room that would be her temporary home and felt a strange mixture of grief and relief. Grief for the relationship she had believed in, for the future she had planned with, someone who had turned out to be so different from what she thought. Relief that she was seeing clearly now that the coffee thrown in her face had somehow washed away the illusions she'd been clinging to. Digging through her bag, she found her small makeup mirror. The face that looked back at her was tired, eyes reddened from crying, but there was something else there too, a determination she hadn't felt in a long time. Tomorrow she would need to figure out logistics, getting her things from there. Shared apartment, finding a new place to live, untangling the practical aspects of their life together. But today, on what remained of her birthday, she would allow herself to grieve and then begin to heal. She took out the journal her night shift colleagues had given her just hours earlier. A lifetime ago, it seemed. Opening to the first blank page, she began to write. Not a plan exactly, but a promise to herself. "Today I turn 30. Today I start over." Everyone at the hospital expected her to call in sick the next day. No one would have blamed her after what happened. But at 6:45 a.m., 15 minutes before her shift was scheduled to begin, she walked through the hospital doors with her head held high. She had woken up early in her friend's spare room, staring at the unfamiliar ceiling. Her first thought had been to hide, to take the sick day that had been offered, to lick her wounds in private. But her second thought was stronger. She wouldn't let him take her dignity as well as her birthday. The morning routine had felt strange, borrowing her friend's shower, wearing yesterday's clean scrubs since she had no other clothes with her. But as she'd looked in the mirror, applying a light touch of borrowed makeup, she'd made a decision. She wouldn't act like a victim, even if that's what everyone expected. She felt the stares as soon as she entered the hospital. Conversations paused when she walked by, then resumed in hushed tones. A few people avoided eye contact altogether, unsure what to say. Others gave her sad, sympathetic smiles that made her stomach twist with embarrassment. Word had spread, as it always did in the hospital grapevine. Her friend had offered to drive her to work, but she'd insisted on taking the bus. "I need to do normal things," she'd explained. "I need to remember that I can." The head nurse spotted her first, eyebrows rising in surprise. "I didn't expect to see you today," she said, concern evident in her voice. "I'd rather be here than sitting around thinking," she replied with a small smile. "If that's okay?" "Of course it's okay, but if it gets to be too much, you just let me know." She nodded, grateful for the understanding but determined not to need it. Grabbing her clipboard, she headed for her first patient's room, falling into the familiar rhythm of morning rounds. Work had always been her safe place, the area of her life where she felt most competent and valued. Today, she needed that more than ever. By mid-morning, the initial awkwardness had begun to fade. Her colleagues took their cues from her, treating her normally when they saw she didn't want to be handled like something fragile. There were no mentions of birthday parties or coffee incidents, just the usual conversations about patients and schedules and weekend plans. During her lunch break, instead of heading to the cafeteria where she might become the center of unwanted attention, she went to the small office used by the hospital's education department. The room was typically empty except during training sessions, making it a perfect, quiet space. She had been thinking all morning, ideas forming and taking shape in her mind. She opened her borrowed laptop and began typing, the words flowing faster than she could almost keep up with. When the education coordinator walked in to retrieve some files, she was surprised to find someone there. "Oh, I didn't realize anyone was using the room," the coordinator said. "Sorry, I should have asked permission," she replied, starting to close her laptop. The coordinator waved away the apology. "No need. This space is for staff use. What are you working on, if you don't mind my asking?" She hesitated, then decided to share. "It's a proposal for a staff awareness program about recognizing signs of unhealthy relationships." Understanding flickered across the coordinator's face. Clearly, she had heard about yesterday's incident. That sounds really valuable," the coordinator said carefully. "Would you like some help developing it? The education department could provide resources." She hadn't expected this response. She had been working on the proposal as a way to process her own experience, to find meaning in what had happened. The idea that it might actually become something real hadn't fully formed yet. "That would be amazing," she said, surprised by the enthusiasm in her own voice. "I was thinking it could focus specifically on healthcare workers. We're so used to taking care of others that sometimes we miss the warning signs in our own lives." The coordinator pulled up a chair. "Tell me more about what you're envisioning." For the next 30 minutes, well past the end of her lunch break, she outlined her ideas. A workshop series that would help hospital staff recognize patterns of controlling behavior, emotional manipulation, and subtle forms of abuse, resources for those who might be in difficult situations, ways to support colleagues who might be struggling. "You know," the coordinator said when she had finished, "we have a monthly staff development slot coming up in 3 weeks. The scheduled speaker had to cancel. This could fill that gap if you're willing to present." The suggestion caught her off guard. "Me? I'm not an expert. I'm just someone who has first-hand experience and the courage to speak about it," the coordinator finished for her. "Sometimes that's more valuable than any expert." The thought of standing in front of her colleagues, talking about what had happened to her, made her stomach clench with anxiety. But beneath that fear was something stronger, a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in a long time. "I'll need help putting it together," she said finally. "You'll have it. The education department will support you every step of the way." When she returned to her unit, the head nurse gave her a questioning look. "Everything okay? You were gone a while." "Actually, everything's better than okay," she replied. "I might need some schedule adjustments over the next few weeks, though. I'm working on a project with the education department." In the days that followed, she divided her time between her nursing duties and developing the workshop. Her friend had gone with her to retrieve essential items from the apartment when they knew he would be at work. She'd taken only what she needed: clothes, personal documents, a few cherished possessions, leaving behind the furniture and household items they had purchased together. Those things seemed to belong to a different life now. He had tried to contact her through friends, through social media, even through colleagues whose numbers he had. Sometimes the messages were angry, accusing her of overreacting. Other times they were pleading, promising he would change. She blocked each new attempt without responding, each block making her feel stronger, more certain of her decision. 3 weeks after the coffee incident, she stood in the hospital auditorium, looking out at rows of seats that were quickly filling with staff members. More people had shown up than expected, not just nurses from her unit, but doctors, administrators, maintenance staff, and even a few members of the hospital board. Her hands trembled slightly as she arranged her notes on The podium. Public speaking had never been her strength. But when she looked up and saw her friend in the front row, giving her an encouraging thumbs up, the trembling subsided. The education coordinator introduced her and then stepped aside, leaving her alone at the microphone. For a moment she stood silently, gathering her courage. Then she took a deep breath and began. 3 weeks ago, on my 30th birthday, the man I had been dating for 3 years threw coffee in my face in the break room upstairs. Some of you were there. Others heard about it afterward. It was humiliating, painful, and public. The room was completely silent, everyone's attention focused on her words. But that moment, as difficult as it was, gave me clarity. It helped me see patterns that had been developing for years: controlling behaviors, isolation from friends, undermining. My confidence all so subtle that I explained them away, or didn't notice them happening at all. She paused, looking around at the faces watching her. Some stunned, some nodding in recognition, all listening intently. I'm standing here today not as a victim, but as a colleague who learned a hard lesson and wants to share it. As healthcare providers, we're trained to spot signs of trouble in our patients. Today, I want to talk about how we can spot those same signs in our own lives and in the lives of the people we work with every day. As she continued speaking, her voice grew, stronger, more confident. This wasn't just about her story anymore. It was about something bigger, about helping others who might be trapped in situations they couldn't see clearly from the inside. What had begun as personal humiliation was transforming, right before everyone's eyes, into something none of them had expected: a movement for awareness and change, starting right here in this hospital, sparked by a cup of coffee and the woman who refused to let it define her. What began as a single presentation to hospital staff quickly grew into something much larger. Word spread about the powerful workshop, and within weeks, other departments were asking if she could bring her program to their teams. The hospital administration, impressed by the positive response, allocated resources to develop materials and create a formal curriculum. 3 months after her coffee-soaked birthday, she sat in a small conference room with the education coordinator and the hospital's communications director. They were reviewing the feedback from the latest session, which had been attended by staff from 3 different hospitals in the city. The response has been incredible, the communications director said, shuffling through comment cards. People are saying this is the most impactful staff development program they've experienced. She still found it hard to believe sometimes. What had started as her personal attempt to make sense of a humiliating experience had evolved into a genuine movement within the healthcare community. We've had requests from 6 more hospitals in the region, the education coordinator added. And the Nursing Journal wants to publish an article about your approach. They're particularly interested in how you've tailored it specifically for healthcare workers. Her approach was indeed unique. Rather than focusing only on the obvious signs of abuse that most awareness programs covered, she addressed the subtler patterns that often went unrecognized, especially among professionals who were trained to be caregivers. She talked about how healthcare workers' tendency to prioritize others' needs could make them vulnerable in personal relationships, how their problem-solving nature might lead them to try to fix troubled relationships rather than recognize when those relationships were fundamentally unhealthy. I never expected this to reach so many people, she admitted, looking down at the stack of feedback forms. Comments like, "This opened my eyes to patterns in my own relationship, and I now understand why my friend stays with her partner," filled the pages. The communications director smiled warmly. That's the thing about honesty. It resonates. You've turned your experience into something that helps others, and people respond to that authenticity. Later that afternoon, she checked her professional email account and found a message that made her pause. The subject line read, "Your presentation changed my life." Opening it, she found a lengthy email from a nurse at another hospital who had attended one of her workshops. The nurse described a relationship disturbingly similar to what she had experienced: the subtle controlling behaviors, the isolation from friends and family, the undermining of professional accomplishments. "After hearing you speak," the email read, "I realized I deserved better. I moved out last weekend. For the first time in years, I feel like I can breathe again. Thank you for giving me the courage to leave my own version of your story." She read the message 3 times, tears gathering in her eyes. When she had first stepped up to that podium 3 months ago, shaking with nervousness, she couldn't have imagined that her words would give someone else the strength to change their life. It was overwhelming in the best possible way. That email was just the beginning. Over the next few months, more messages arrived, from nurses, doctors, technicians, and administrative staff across the healthcare system. Some shared their own stories of leaving unhealthy relationships. Others described how they had recognized warning signs and offered support to colleagues who were struggling. A few admitted they had recognized controlling behaviors in themselves and were seeking help to change. The program expanded beyond in-person workshops. She worked with the education department to create online modules that could reach healthcare workers in rural areas. She recorded podcasts discussing different aspects of relationship dynamics. She collaborated with the hospital's IT department to develop an app that provided resources and support networks. 6 months after the coffee incident, she received an invitation that left her momentarily speechless. The National Healthcare Workers Association wanted her to be a keynote speaker at their annual conference, an event attended by thousands of professionals from across the country. "They want me to speak to thousands of people?" she asked her friend in disbelief, staring at the email. "I'm not an expert. I'm just a nurse who had coffee thrown in her face." Her friend shook her head firmly. "You're the woman who turned that moment into a movement that's helping people across the state. Of course they want to hear from you." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. She revised her presentation, expanding it to address the wider audience. She worked with speech coaches provided by the hospital to refine her delivery. She practiced in front of friends, colleagues, and even patients who volunteered to listen. On the day of the conference, she stood backstage, taking deep breaths to calm her racing heart. The venue was enormous, much larger than the hospital auditorium where this had all begun. Through the curtain, she could see hundreds of healthcare professionals finding their seats, their conversations creating a gentle hum that filled the space. The conference organizer approached with a smile. "We've got a full house. Word spread about your session and people were scrambling for seats. Are you ready?" Was she ready? She thought back to that birthday nearly a year ago. How small she had felt with coffee dripping down her face. How humiliated and powerless. If someone had told her then that she would be standing here now, about to address thousands of colleagues about turning personal pain into professional purpose, she would never have believed it. Yet here she was. Not because she was special or particularly brave, but because she had made a choice in that moment of clarity, to not let someone else's cruelty define her. "I'm ready," she said with quiet confidence. The introduction was brief but powerful, describing the program she had developed and its impact across the healthcare system. Then it was her turn to step onto the stage, the spotlight momentarily blinding as she approached the podium, looking out at the sea of faces, all healthcare workers like herself, all people who had dedicated their lives to caring for others. She felt a surge of connection. These were her people, this was her community. "Almost 1 year ago," she began, her voice steady and clear, "on my 30th birthday, I experienced a moment of public humiliation that changed the course of my life." The room fell silent. Thousands of people leaning forward slightly, drawn in by the simplicity and honesty of her opening. "That morning, I was a nurse who defined herself largely through her relationship with someone else. By that evening, I was forced to redefine myself, to look in the mirror and decide who I wanted to be when that relationship was stripped away." She paused, looking out at the audience, seeing not just healthcare professionals, but human beings, with their own stories, their own struggles, their own moments of vulnerability. What I discovered in that process of redefinition was not just personal healing, but a calling to help others who might be where I was, unable to see the patterns of an unhealthy relationship because they were too close to it, too trained to care for others rather than themselves. As she continued her presentation, she noticed people nodding, some wiping away tears, others taking notes furiously. Her story was resonating not because it was dramatic or unusual, but because it was human. A story of falling down and getting back up, of turning pain into purpose. The colleagues who supported me that day didn't just help me clean coffee stains from my face, she told them. They showed me what real respect and care look like. They reminded me of my worth when I had forgotten it. And in doing so, they gave me a model for how we can support each other through our most vulnerable moments. In the front row, she spotted her friend, who had offered her spare room that night, the head nurse who had adjusted schedules and offered support, the education coordinator who had helped turn her idea into a program. They had all come to witness this moment, this transformation from victim to advocate. On what would have been her first anniversary with her ex-boyfriend, she was instead standing on a national stage, turning the worst moment of her life into a message that was helping thousands. The symmetry felt both powerful and healing. I am not standing here today because I am exceptionally strong or wise, she concluded. I am here because when I was at my lowest, I was reminded that I belonged to a community of caregivers who knew my true worth. My hope is that after today, each of you will be more prepared to be that reminder for someone in your life who needs it. The applause that followed was deafening, not just polite conference clapping, but a genuine emotional response from thousands of people who had been moved by her journey. As she stepped away from the podium, she realized that the coffee thrown in her face on her birthday hadn't diminished her. In the most unexpected way, it had set her free.